He ignored 17 calls from his wife, 17 frantic messages, while their 4-year-old son fought for his life, his small hands at his throat as his lips turned a terrifying shade of blue. Her husband saw every call. He read every text begging for help. Then he silenced his phone, pulled his mistress closer, and fell back asleep. His son's last word was, "Daddy." But his daddy chose not to answer. What this grieving mother does next is the story of a promise kept. She was not just a housewife, she was a brilliant lawyer with a father trained in military intelligence. And when she learned the truth, she did not fall apart. She got even. This is the story of how she and her father dismantled the lives of everyone who betrayed her son. Stick around, because you will be cheering for her by the end. This story is more than entertainment. It is a reminder that betrayal does not have to destroy you. It can rebuild you into someone stronger. If you have ever felt powerless, overlooked, or used by someone you trusted, this story will show you that justice is possible when you refuse to stay silent. Now, let's get into it. And if this story touches you, please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe so we can share more stories like this one. Now, let's get into it. The story ends 3 months after her son's death at a funeral. The December wind in the Manhattan cemetery was sharp enough to cut through the mourners' dark coats. Elena Crawford stood near the casket, her expression unreadable, and her posture perfectly still. She was wearing an elegant black dress that cost a fortune, her dark hair pulled back without a single stray strand. To any observer, she was the image of quiet sorrow. But inside her, something much hotter than grief was burning. The words from the minister about God's plan were just meaningless noise. Elena had lost her faith on that cold December night when her 4-year-old son died. He died because his father was in bed with another woman and ignored her calls. Now, standing at a funeral she herself had arranged, Elena allowed a small, satisfied smile. It was not a smile of joy, but one of grim finality. She thought of the words she had practiced for so many sleepless nights. They say grief makes you do irrational things, but it was not grief that drove me. It was betrayal. The people who wrecked her family discovered too late that she was her father's daughter, and her father taught her that some things can never be forgiven. As the minister finished, Elena's eyes scanned the crowd, noting 2 people who were not there. Her husband, Brad Crawford, was now serving a 15-year sentence. His mistress, Sloan Hartley, was facing 47 years justice. To understand how Elena went from a heartbroken wife to the architect of their downfall, we have to go back 3 months, to a morning that started like any other. The cold in their small Manhattan kitchen seemed to settle deep in your bones. Elena moved with the tired precision of a mother running on pure adrenaline. Her son, Evan, sat at the table, a tiny 4-year-old boy connected by wires to a portable heart monitor that beeped softly under his dinosaur pajamas. Elena put a plate of pancakes, cut into fun shapes, in front of him. She forced a smile, hiding her exhaustion. "Here you go, my love," she said gently. "Your favorite." Evan poked at a pancake with his fork. "Thanks, Mommy." Then, heavy footsteps came down the stairs. Brad Crawford walked into the kitchen with the air of a man who found his own family an inconvenience. His suit was expensive, his watch worth more than their son's medical equipment. He wore a new cologne Elena did not recognize. He did not even glance at Evan, barely looking at his wife as he scrolled through his phone. Elena watched him, noticing how he angled his body away from them and the slight smirk he had while reading a text. "His cardiology appointment is at 2 this afternoon," Elena said, her voice steady. "Will you be there?" Brad didn't look up. "I have the Henderson deal today. I cannot just leave for a routine checkup." "It is not routine," she replied. Your son needs you. Now he finally looked at her, his eyes cold and distant. Someone has to pay for all these treatments, Elena. Or have you forgotten you quit your job 4 years ago? The accusation hit her hard, but she stayed silent. She had given up her entire career as a top lawyer to care for their son, and he constantly used it against her. Brad grabbed his briefcase. He did not kiss her goodbye. He did not even look at their son, who was watching him with wide, hopeful eyes. "Daddy?" Evan called out, his voice small. Brad paused at the door, clearly annoyed. "What is it? Will you come to my appointment? The doctor said there might be good news." For a split second, a flicker of something human crossed Brad's face before his usual impatience took over. "We will see, buddy. Daddy's really busy." And then he was gone. The door clicked shut, and Evan's little shoulders slumped. He pushed his pancakes around, his appetite gone. "Mommy," he whispered, his voice cracking, "why doesn't Daddy like me?" The question shattered Elena's heart. She knelt by his chair and hugged him carefully, avoiding the mess of wires. "Of course, Daddy loves you, sweet boy. He is just very busy with work." The lie felt like poison on her tongue. How could she tell her 4-year-old that his own father saw his illness as a burden, an embarrassing flaw in his perfect life? Evan just nodded, trusting his mom completely. "I love you, Mommy," he mumbled into her shoulder. Elena hugged him tighter, trying to memorize the feel of his small heart beating against her chest. "I love you more than anything in the world, baby." She had no idea she only had 12 hours left with him. Later, in the hospital waiting room, Elena held Evan on her lap. They had been waiting for almost an hour. The plastic chair next to her was empty. A nurse, she knew, walked by and gave her a sympathetic look. "Working late again?" the nurse asked softly. Elena just forced a smile and said, "He is very committed to his work." The nurse gave a sad little nod, the kind that said she had seen too many fathers choose work over their sick children. A moment later, Elena's phone buzzed. It was a text from Brad. "Client dinner tonight. Don't wait up." She stared at the words. She knew what client dinner meant. She had known for months that there was someone else, but she had been too afraid to face it. Putting her own pain aside, Elena shut off her phone and held her son closer. Whatever was going on with her husband would have to wait. All that mattered right then was the little boy in her arms. Dr. Harrison, a kind man in his 60s, had always spoken directly to Evan, but today his gentle eyes were full of trouble. The doctor explained carefully, "His condition is getting worse. While the medicine helps, his heart is working much too hard. We have to watch him more closely now." Elena felt a chill spread through her. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means more tests for now," he said. "But I must be very clear, Mrs. Crawford. If Evan has any trouble breathing at all, you must call 911 right away. Do not try to drive him here yourself. Do not wait." Elena nodded, her throat tight with fear. "I understand." The doctor then looked at Evan with a soft smile. "You are a brave young man. Your heart is working extra hard, which makes you special. But you must promise to tell your mommy if it ever feels hard to breathe." Evan nodded seriously and promised, "I will tell Mommy." "Good boy," the doctor said, patting his head. He told Elena they would schedule more tests for the following week, reminding her to keep the monitor on Evan constantly. Leaving the hospital, Elena was hit by the gray December air. Her phone buzzed with another text from her husband, Brad. The message read, "Meeting is running late. I will not be home before midnight." She deleted it without a reply. That night, Elena moved through their bedtime routine with an extra layer of love, as if a deep part of her knew their time was short. She bathed him, careful with the wires, and dressed him in his favorite dinosaur pajamas. After brushing his teeth, she tucked him into his bed, surrounded by stuffed animals. "What story should we read tonight, my love?" Evan thought for a moment, with great seriousness. He chose the one about the brave knight. Elena smiled and grabbed the familiar, well-loved book from his shelf. They had read it 100 times, but Evan loved the story of a knight who faced dragons and never gave up, no matter how afraid he was. She read each word slowly, watching her son's eyes get heavy with sleep. As she finished, his breathing was deep and even. "Mommy," he whispered, his voice sleepy. "Yes, sweetheart. Will I get better?" The question was like a knife in her heart. She leaned down and kissed his forehead, trying to hold back her tears. "You are the bravest boy I know," she whispered back, "and brave boys always get better." He gave her a small, sleepy smile and closed his eyes. Elena stayed by his side, memorizing his face, the way his eyelashes fluttered. She watched the steady rise and fall of his small chest. For some reason, she felt an urgent need to remember every single detail. "I love you more than anything, Evan," she whispered, before kissing him one last time and quietly leaving his room. A few hours later, while folding laundry, she found it in the pocket of Brad's pants. It was a receipt from the St. Regis Hotel for Suite 1904. The charge was $1,200 for a single night from last Tuesday. Her hands started to tremble. She expected to feel rage, but instead, a terrible, crushing certainty washed over her. A part of her had known all along. Elena stared at the receipt, then carefully folded it and placed it back in his pocket. She could not face it. Not now. Not while her son was in the next room fighting for his life. She could not handle the end of her marriage. Not while she might be losing her child. "I will deal with this tomorrow," she promised herself. But her tomorrow would be nothing like she imagined. In less than 4 hours, Elena's world would shatter completely. At 11:23 that night, a sound woke Elena up. It was a wet, desperate gasping, a horrible sound that gripped her heart with fear. "Evan!" She bolted out of bed, her feet hitting the cold floor as she raced to his room. What she saw there made her freeze. Evan was sitting up, clutching his throat, his lips turning a terrifying shade of blue. His eyes were wide with panic. The heart monitor shrieked, its red lights flashing like a warning. "Baby!" Elena rushed to him, pulling him into her arms. She could feel his small chest struggling for air. Something was terribly wrong. Her hand shook as she grabbed her phone and dialed Brad. The call went to voicemail. She tried again, and again it went to voicemail. She sent a frantic text. "Evan cannot breathe. Hospital. Please come." The read receipt appeared instantly. It was seen at 11:31, but there was no reply. With no time to feel the sting of his betrayal, Elena dialed 911. Her voice was surprisingly calm as she explained what was happening. The dispatcher told her to keep Evan upright and calm, that help was on its way. She held her son close, rocking him and whispering over and over, "Stay with me, baby. Mommy is here. Help is coming. You are my brave boy. Please, please stay with me." Evan's small hand found hers and squeezed. He managed to whisper a single word she could barely hear. "Daddy, he is coming, honey," Elena lied, as tears streamed down her face. But his daddy was not coming. Just 12 blocks away, in Suite 1904 of the St. Regis Hotel, Brad Crawford was in bed with another woman. Sloan Hartley was young, ambitious, and free of the burdens of a sick child. She was everything Elena was not. Her fingers traced patterns on Brad's skin as his phone buzzed on the nightstand. It buzzed again, and then again. Sloan lazily picked it up. "She is calling again," she said, showing Brad the screen. "She is texting now. It looks urgent." Brad barely opened his eyes. He had been through this before. Elena always overreacted when Evan had these episodes. She is so dramatic, he said, with a wave of his hand. He gets these little spells, but he always pulls through. She panics about everything. But it says emergency, Sloan noted, with a slight hint of concern. Maybe you should just call her back. Brad reached over, silenced the phone, and placed it face down. If it were a real emergency, she would have called an ambulance. She knows I am in an important meeting. Sloan simply shrugged. She had never met the boy and had no desire to. A sick child was a complication, a drain on resources that could be used for other things. You're right, she purred, snuggling closer to him. She's probably overreacting. Now, where were we? Brad smiled and pulled her in. And as they embraced, a little boy, just 12 blocks away, was dying. The ambulance arrived in what felt like an eternity, but was actually 7 minutes. The paramedics worked quickly, getting Evan onto a gurney and giving him oxygen. Elena jumped in the back with him, never letting go of his hand. The ride to the hospital was a dizzying blur of sirens and flashing lights. She kept her eyes on Evan's face, telling him to hold on, that he was going to be fine, but his color was wrong. His breathing was wrong. They rushed through the emergency room doors at 11:42. Doctors and nurses swarmed the gurney, shouting medical terms. Elena did not understand. Someone gently tried to lead her to the waiting room, but she refused. "He is my son. Please, that is my son." A kind nurse finally managed to guide her away, promising, "We are going to do everything we can. Please, you need to give them room to work." The doctor's words barely registered. Elena just nodded, speechless. She was frozen in the hospital corridor, staring through a window as a team fought for her baby's life. Beeps from machines filled the air, hands moved in a blur, and then one person started chest compressions. She tried calling Brad again, but it went straight to voicemail. This time she left a frantic message. "Brad, it's Evan. It is really bad. Please get to the hospital. Please." Then she waited, praying to a God she had lost faith in long ago. "I will do anything," she bargained. "Just let him live." At 11:47 in the evening, the rhythmic beeping stopped. It was replaced by a long, flat tone that would haunt her nightmares forever. A doctor walked out of the room, his face etched with sorrow and exhaustion. He did not have to speak. Elena knew. "Mrs. Crawford, I am so sorry. We tried everything we possibly could." Elena's knees gave way. She crumpled against the wall, sliding down to the cold, sterile floor. A raw, animalistic wail escaped her throat, a sound she had never made before. It echoed down the empty hallway. Her baby, her sweet little boy, was gone. The hospital chapel was deserted. At 2 in the morning, Elena sat in the front row, clutching Evan's dinosaur blanket. She breathed in the faint scent of baby shampoo and her little boy. The tears had stopped. There was only a hollow emptiness where her heart should have been. Her phone buzzed. It was not a call, but an email notification. The family iPad was linked to Brad's email, something he had set up years ago. He must have forgotten she could see all his incoming messages. She glanced at the screen. Hotel confirmation, St. Regis, for tonight. An email from a woman named Sloan followed. "Tonight was amazing. I cannot wait for tomorrow. I miss you already." Elena read the words over and over until they became a blur. Then she started to laugh, a broken, unhinged sound. It was the laugh of a woman who had lost everything, only to discover a final, cruel betrayal. It was the sound of grief twisting into something much darker. Her son died crying for a father who was in bed with another woman, ignoring the calls that might have saved him. The laughter stopped, all feeling drained away. A cold, methodical calm filled the void inside her. It was a part of her that saw the situation with perfect clarity and began to form a plan. She held the blanket to her face one last time, taking in Evan's scent. She folded it neatly, put it in her bag, and stood up. She would be ready when Brad came home. Brad Crawford walked in the front door at 6 in the morning, smelling of a fresh shower and expensive soap. He was already practicing his excuses. He had several lies ready to go. He froze when he saw Elena sitting in the living room in the dark. She sat in an armchair directly facing the door, completely still, with her hands folded in her lap. Evan's blanket was draped over her knees. On the coffee table lay 2 printed emails. "Babe," Brad began, his voice dripping with fake concern. "I'm so sorry I missed your calls. The meeting went on forever. By the time I saw your messages, I assumed everything was okay." Elena was silent. She just stared at him. Brad fidgeted. He was not used to this. Usually, she would be crying or begging him to be a better husband. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice now laced with genuine confusion. "Where's Evan?" Elena's voice was flat and empty when she finally spoke. "Evan died at 11:47 last night." For a second, Brad's carefully crafted expression disappeared, replaced by pure shock. "What?" He stopped breathing. "I called you 17 times. The read receipts prove you saw my messages." "Elena, I did not know. My phone was on silent during the meetings. I saw them later, but I thought he was fine. You said he had these spells before." Elena lifted the first printed email. "St. Regis Hotel, Suite 1904. Billed last night for $1,200 to our joint credit card." Brad's composure wavered. She saw the conflict in his eyes, guilt fighting with self-preservation. Self-preservation won. "I can explain that. The firm booked it for a late client meeting. I just stayed there instead of driving home." Elena then held up the second email, the one from Sloan. "Tonight was amazing. Cannot wait for tomorrow." The silence was deafening. Brad's face twisted with guilt, then fear, and finally settled into cold anger. "You are in shock," he said, using the patronizing tone she despised. "You're just looking for someone to blame after losing our son. I get it. We can discuss this after you have had some time to calm down." Elena rose to her feet. She had forgotten that when she stood straight, she was taller than him. She had spent years making herself smaller for his comfort. "His last word was Daddy," she said softly. "He was terrified and could not breathe. He was calling for you while you were with another woman." Brad took a step back, startled by the cold, dangerous look in her eyes. "Elena, listen. You are not thinking straight. Grief is making you say crazy things. Let me call a therapist for you. We will get through this. Get out." "This is my house," Brad blustered, his confidence returning. "I am not going anywhere. You're having a breakdown. We can deal with this in the morning." Elena moved closer, so close he could see the absolute ice in her gaze. "Before I gave up my career for you, I was a corporate litigator. I know about the shell companies you think are so secret. I know about the offshore accounts. I also know which partners at your firm would be very interested to learn what you have been doing with client money. So, when I say get out, it is not a request. It is a command. You have exactly 5 minutes before I start making phone calls." Brad just stared, genuine fear finally showing on his face. He grabbed his coat and left without saying another word. Elena watched him leave, then sat down and pulled Evan's blanket to her chest. She gave herself 1 more hour to grieve, to cry and scream into the soft fabric until she was completely broken. Then she dried her tears, sat up straight, and picked up her phone. She found a contact she had not dialed in 5 years. One Brad had made her delete. Dad. Her thumb hovered over the name as memories rushed back. She heard Brad's smooth, manipulative voice. "Your father is a controlling man, Elena. He never liked me. You have to choose if you want our marriage to work." She had chosen Brad. It was the worst mistake of her life, but it was one she could now begin to fix. She hit the call button. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered instantly, as if he had been waiting for this call for years. Elena? Daddy, her voice cracked. Evan is gone, and I am all alone. There was a long silence on the line. Then, his voice, filled with a quiet, controlled rage, said, I am on my way. Colonel Marcus Holden arrived at Elena's apartment 18 hours later. He had driven all night from his home in Virginia. When Elena opened the door, she saw a man changed by time. The last 5 years had added more gray to his hair and deeper lines to his face. But his eyes were the same, sharp, clear, and intelligent. They were the eyes of a man who spent his life in military intelligence. He took one look at his daughter's broken expression and pulled her into a tight hug. Elena finally let go, collapsing against his chest and sobbing. She had held it all together through the confrontation with Brad and the awful phone calls to the funeral home. But in her father's arms, she could finally fall apart. I pushed you away, she choked out. I believed him when he said you were the problem. I chose him, and now my baby is dead, and I have nothing left. Marcus just held her tighter. I know what he did, honey. I know. It was agonizing to watch from afar, but that was in the past. Her father, Marcus, held her face just as he did when she was a little girl with a scraped knee. He asked her to explain everything from the very beginning, so she did. She spoke of the affair she long suspected, the receipts she found but ignored, and the night her son, Evan, died. She told him about the 17 unanswered phone calls and Brad's cold, calculated denials. When she was done, Marcus was silent. His jaw was clenched, his eyes turning cold. Elena knew that expression. It was the look of a man preparing for battle. What do you want? He finally asked. Elena looked at him, her grief now hardened into something sharp and useful. I want to take everything from him, she said, her voice completely steady. His money, his reputation, and his freedom. I want him to know what it feels like to have nothing left. Marcus gave a slow, deliberate nod. Then we will do this the right way. No mistakes, no emotional decisions. We will plan, we will gather our proof, and when we are done, nothing will remain of Brad Crawford. He said it with the calm certainty of a man discussing a simple task. For the first time in what felt like forever, Elena felt a flicker of hope. But how? She asked. Marcus took a small, familiar notebook from his pocket, the kind he always carried during his military career. First, he said, we need people on our side. You are a corporate lawyer. Are there any old contacts who could help? Elena paused, and one name came to mind. Rachel Bennett, she said. She was my best friend in law school. Now she is one of the best divorce attorneys in the city. Marcus looked curious. A best friend? You have not mentioned her in years. I pushed her away, Elena confessed, feeling a wave of shame. Brad convinced me she was a bad influence, so I cut her out of my life. Do you believe she would still help you? Elena thought of Rachel's fierce loyalty, how she never gave up, sending cards long after Elena stopped replying. I think she would. Good. Call her, Marcus said. Now, what about proof? You mentioned shell companies and bank accounts overseas. Do you have anything concrete? Only suspicions, she admitted. I have some receipts and emails, but I only know about the serious financial deals because I overheard Brad on the phone. Then we need to get into his computer, his files, and his bank records. A cold, dangerous smile appeared on Marcus's face. Lucky for you, I spent 30 years in military intelligence. I have friends who can find things that are meant to stay buried. Is that legal? She asked. Marcus's smile remained. That depends on your definition. 3 days later, Elena met Rachel at a quiet cafe. It was awkward at first, filled with the weight of 5 years of silence. Rachel looked successful, polished, and confident. But the moment she saw Elena, Her professional facade crumbled, and her eyes filled with tears. "Lena," she whispered, "I was so sorry to hear about Evan." They hugged, and the years of distance between them vanished. They sat together at a table in the corner, their coffee growing cold as they talked. "I need your help," Elena finally said. "Not just as my friend. I need the best divorce lawyer in the city." Rachel nodded. "I can see from your expression that this is about more than just a divorce." Elena handed her a folder containing emails, hotel bills, and the first of the financial papers her father's contacts had found. "Over the years, Brad had me sign financial documents," she explained. "I trusted him, so I never read them. Now I realize they were not what he claimed." Rachel examined the papers, her face growing more serious with every page she turned. "These are not for household expenses," she said. "These are corporate registrations for shell companies. Elena, if this is accurate, your husband was using you for much more than just an affair." "What does that mean?" "It means you need to find out exactly what your name is on. If these companies were used for anything illegal, your signature makes you responsible." The color drained from Elena's face. "So he did not just betray me, he framed me?" "It certainly looks that way," Rachel said, squeezing her hand. "But there is good news. If we can prove you signed these under false pretenses, we can turn this around on him. He becomes the criminal, not you." "How?" "We start by documenting every paper you can remember signing. We will get a handwriting expert if we have to." Elena nodded. "I can do that. My father is already working up on getting Brad's financial records." "Your father?" Rachel asked, surprised. "I thought you two were not speaking." "We were not," Elena said, her jaw tight. "But things change when your grandson dies, because your son-in-law was too busy with his mistress to answer the phone." A moment of silence passed. Then Rachel took her hand again. "I told you 5 years ago that Brad was not right for you," she said gently. "I was not jealous. I was worried about you." "I know, and I am sorry." "Do not be sorry," Rachel said, her expression turning to steel. "Be ready to fight. I am going to help you. We will do this together." For the first time since Evan's death, Elena felt the warmth of friendship and the strength of having someone in her corner. "Thank you," she whispered. Rachel smiled. "Save your thanks for when we see that man in a jail cell." The next 3 weeks were a blur of work. Elena met with investigators and specialists provided by Marcus's contacts. During that time, Elena changed. The crying stopped. She began to function again, but she was different. Her grief had not vanished, but it had hardened into a shield. She searched her memory with perfect clarity, listing every document Brad had pushed her to sign when she was too tired or too trusting to ask questions. She remembered signing papers for their house, for Evan's trust fund, for insurance. He had used her complete trust against her in the most systematic way. At the same time, Marcus activated his network. Within 2 weeks, he had 5 years of Brad's financial history. What the documents showed was shocking. There were shell companies, offshore accounts, and millions of dollars moving through accounts that had Elena's signature on them. "He has been laundering money," Marcus stated grimly. "The only question is for whom? Is he in charge, or is he just a pawn in a bigger game?" Elena's old legal instincts returned as she looked over the records. "Some of these money transfers are strange," she noted. "The money comes from accounts Brad should not have access to, and it goes to people I have never heard of. If he was running the whole show, he would have covered his tracks better." "So someone else is in control?" "Possibly," Elena said with a frown. "We need to find out who." But for now, they had more than enough to begin. 3 weeks after her son's funeral, Elena sat in Rachel's office with a folder overflowing with proof. They had evidence of the affair, the financial crimes, and the most damning piece of all, security footage from Brad's office. Elena watched the video from the night Evan died. She saw Brad look at his phone, see her name flash on the screen, and then silence the call. She watched him smile at something, likely a message from his mistress Sloan, and put the phone away. He knew it was me, Elena said, her voice hollow but strong. He knew it was an emergency, and he chose to ignore it. Rachel nodded. This is what we need. With this, the affair, and the fraud, we have enough to ruin him. Are you ready? Elena looked at the folder, a summary of all her pain on paper. She thought of Evan, and the hope in his voice every time he asked if his father was coming home. File the papers, she told her lawyer. But before Rachel could even pick up the phone, a text message arrived from an unknown number. Elena's blood turned to ice as she read it. You should not have started this fight, it said. You have no idea who you are dealing with. She showed the message to Rachel. Was it Brad? Elena shook her head. This was not his style. This was someone else. Someone who knew they were investigating. Rachel paused. Do you want to wait? Elena thought for a long moment. Then her jaw tightened. No. We file tomorrow, she declared. Running scared will not help us. We move forward, and we find out who is really behind all this. Rachel gave her a fierce, admiring smile. That is the Elena I remember, she said. Welcome back. Elena filed for divorce that Tuesday. By Wednesday, her world had fallen apart all over again. It began with a knock on her door. 2 men in dark suits flashed badges. Mrs. Crawford, I am Agent Morrison with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We need to ask you about Meridian Holdings. Elena's stomach plummeted. She recognized the name from some papers she had signed without reading. What about it? You are listed as the primary shareholder, the agent said, his voice flat and accusing. My husband made me sign documents, she explained, her voice trembling. I did not know what they were. That is what they all say, Mrs. Crawford, the other agent said with a sneer. For the next 3 hours, they buried her in evidence. Bank records showed millions of dollars moving through accounts in her name. Wire transfers pointed to money laundering. Corporate papers bore her signature, each one another nail in a coffin she never knew existed. When they left, Elena sat in stunned silence. Brad had not just cheated on her and abandoned their dying son. He had spent years carefully setting her up to take the fall for his crimes. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from a number she did not recognize. The message said, I warned you. Then another text arrived with a document attached. With trembling hands, Elena opened it. It was a restraining order Brad had filed against her. He claimed she had threatened him, that she was mentally unstable and a danger to everyone. The order included statements from people she thought were her friends, all saying she was unfit and dangerous. Then her phone rang. It was her lawyer, Rachel. Elena, we have a big problem. I know, she said. The FBI was here, and Brad filed a restraining order. It is worse than that, Rachel replied, her voice tense. Brad filed for divorce this morning. He filed first, and his accusations are terrible. What accusations? He is telling everyone that you neglected Evan. He is telling everyone you were unstable, that you made him sick, and he was the hero holding things together. He even has witnesses. That is a complete lie. I quit my job for our son. I took him to every doctor's visit while Brad was nowhere to be found. I know, but the story is already spreading. His mother is poisoning everyone against you. People are picking sides, and they are not on yours. Elena shut her eyes. He is making me the villain. Precisely. The crazy wife, the careless mother, the criminal. He wants to ruin you. So how do we stop him? We use the truth. We show them the affair and the forged documents. We have to go public before he twists everything. Rachel paused. That will be difficult. But if they think you are involved in the money laundering, you could face criminal charges, Rachel warned. We have to prove you had no idea what you were signing. How long will that take? It could be weeks, maybe even months. Elena stared at the ceiling. A month ago, she was just a mother with a sick child. Now she was a widow, a federal suspect, and the target of a vicious smear campaign. My father, she said suddenly. Have you spoken to him? He called an hour ago, Rachel replied. He is already working on something. He said to tell you not to give up. What is he doing? I do not know, but I have known your father for years. That man does not lose. Whatever he is planning, it is going to hurt someone. I hope so, Elena whispered. I really, really hope so. The following 2 weeks were the worst of Elena's life. She was served with the restraining order, barring her from her own home. She was called in for 2 more interrogations, each more aggressive than the last. Everywhere she went, she felt the stares of people who had already judged her. At the grocery store, an old acquaintance cornered her. I heard what you did to Brad, the woman said, loudly, for everyone to hear. He was such a good man, and you try to blame him for your son's death. You should be ashamed. Elena said nothing. She left her cart and walked out of the store with her head held high, refusing to let them see her break. But back in her apartment, she finally collapsed. She sat on the cold bathroom floor, clutching her son Evan's dinosaur blanket, and sobbed until no tears were left. Elena felt crushed by despair when her phone lit up with a message from her dad. 30 minutes later, Marcus Holden saw his daughter looking completely defeated. He skipped the useless reassurances and got straight to the point. He told her she was acting like a soldier who lost one skirmish and thinks the war is over. Elena just shook her head. He has everything, Dad. The money, the power. They are investigating me, not him. I have nothing. Marcus leaned in close. You have me. You have the truth, and you have something Brad will never have, Patience. I did not spend 30 years in military intelligence just to watch some fraud ruin my daughter. We are not fighting his war, Marcus explained with a cold smile. We are fighting ours, and in our war, we make sure everyone who helped him goes down with him. His plan began in a private room at an old money club in Manhattan. Colonel Marcus Holden sat across from 3 men in expensive suits. They were the senior partners at Brad Crawford's investment firm. Gentlemen, Marcus began, thank you for meeting me. The oldest partner, Richard Hamilton, looked wary. We know your reputation, Colonel, Hamilton said. What is this about? Marcus slid a thick folder across the table. This is about irregularities in your firm's accounts. All tied to Brad Crawford. He saw fear flicker in their eyes. What kind of irregularities? One of them asked. Marcus showed them the contents. Client funds disappearing into offshore accounts. Shell companies hiding illegal transfers. It was a detailed map of a money laundering scheme. A heavy silence filled the room. I am not suggesting you knew, Marcus said calmly. So why bring this to us? Hamilton asked. Why not the authorities? Because, Marcus replied, the authorities tend to dig deep. They might not stop with Mr. Crawford. They might start asking what his partners knew. The threat hung in the air, thick and heavy. One partner went pale. What do you want? Hamilton's voice was ice. It is simple, Marcus said. I want Brad Crawford fired, immediately and very publicly. You will make it clear your firm does not tolerate his behavior. And if we say no, then this folder lands on the desks of the FBI and a few reporters I know. The story will hurt everyone, but it will destroy you. Hamilton stared, then picked up the folder. As he and his partners read, the color drained from their faces. We will need to verify this, Hamilton finally said. Of course, Marcus stood to leave. But do it quickly. He paused at the door. One more thing. My grandson died because Mr. Crawford was too busy with his mistress to take a call. So when I ask you to fire him, believe me, I am being very restrained. 2 days later, Brad Crawford walked into his office building and was met by security. The partners want to see you, the head guard said flatly. As they escorted him to the conference room, Brad's confidence began to crack. He saw the whispers and the stares from his colleagues, who suddenly avoided his gaze. Inside the room, the three senior partners waited for him, their faces like stone. "What is going on?" Brad demanded. "You're on administrative leave, effective immediately," Hamilton stated, pushing a letter across the table. "There is an investigation into your accounts." Brad's face turned red. "This is insane. You no longer have access to this building or any company resources. Security will escort you out now," Pierce added. "You cannot do this." "We already have," Hamilton said calmly. For the first time, Brad looked truly afraid. "This is not over," he snarled. "Good day, Mr. Crawford." A text from her friend Rachel confirmed it. Brad was out. Elena called her father right away. "How?" "I just gave the right people the right information," he said. "Now we wait and see which of his allies try to help him. That is our next target list." He also had good news. The handwriting expert confirmed the signatures used to frame her were forgeries. It was the first real breath Elena had taken in weeks. "Do not thank me yet," her dad warned. "This is just the start." 3 days later, Rachel called, her voice buzzing with energy. "I was digging into Sloan Hartley, Brad's mistress," she said. "She is not just a mistress, Elena. She is the mastermind." Rachel explained that Sloan had researched and targeted Brad years ago, specifically because of his connection to Elena's family. Her real name is Susan Mitchell. She has a fraud conviction from 10 years ago. She is a professional con artist. Suddenly, everything made sense to Elena. Brad was not the villain. He was a pawn. "But why us?" she asked. "Your father," Rachel said grimly. "Sloan used Brad to get to you. She used you to get to Colonel Marcus Holden and his security company. Your dad's government contracts are what she was really after." Elena sank into her chair. Brad was just the weapon. The true enemy was someone she never even considered. "Does Dad know?" "He is finding out as we speak," Rachel said, "and he is not happy. Also, there is one more thing, Model. The money being laundered in your name was being skimmed by Sloan herself. She was stealing from her own scheme and funneling it into secret accounts that traced directly back to her. Brad likely had no clue. She planned to grab the cash and vanish, leaving both me and Brad to take the fall. The betrayal was immense. Elena felt the weight of it all. This woman she had never met had systematically destroyed her life. "So what is our next move?" Rachel's voice was firm. "We make them turn on each other, and then we take what is left." The plan was simple. We just had to show Brad that Sloan, the woman he thought he controlled, had been playing him the entire time. His ego would handle the rest. It began with a series of anonymous tips, fed to Brad through sources he trusted completely. A worried friend who had supposedly heard things, a colleague who found oddities in the financial records, a private investigator's report that mysteriously landed on his desk. Every piece of the puzzle pointed to one ugly truth. Sloan was not his partner, she was his puppeteer, and she was getting ready to cut his strings and escape with a fortune. Brad reacted exactly as they knew he would. The showdown took place at Sloan's apartment. He stormed in, his face a mask of rage, holding the evidence they had leaked to him. "You have been stealing from me," he growled. "All this time you were setting me up." Sloan, ever composed, had prepared for this moment. "Darling, you are sounding paranoid. I can explain whatever you think you found." "Explain this," he said, throwing a thick file at her. It contained bank statements and a clear paper trail leading to her secret accounts. "Accounts you swore did not exist." Sloan calmly picked up the papers, her eyes scanning them. Her expression remained neutral, but a flicker of recalculation showed in her eyes. She was already adapting. "Where did you get this information?" she asked softly. "As if that matters. You played me for a fool. I risked everything so you could run away with all the money. Tell me, was any part of our relationship real? Or was I just your pawn?" Sloan set the documents aside, her gaze almost pitying. Oh, Brad, you are so naive. Everything I did was for our future. The plan was always to escape to a new country together, a place where no one could touch us. Together? Brad laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. You were framing my wife for your crimes. You were building a case against me to ensure your own clean getaway. I was building a case against her, not you. There is a very big difference. Your wife's name is on everything. She is the one the federal agents are watching. When this is all over, she goes to prison, and we walk away free. And those secret accounts? She said, stepping closer. Just an insurance policy. Her voice became a soothing whisper. But it does not have to end this way. We can still have everything we dreamed of. Brad just stared at her. For a moment, those watching wondered if he would fall for her lies one last time. But he did not. I trusted you, he said, his voice flat and empty. I gave up my own son for you. I ruined my family for you, and you were just going to leave me to rot. Brad, please. No, he said, backing away. I am finished. I am not going down for you. And with that, he walked out. Sloane's calm finally broke, revealing a cold fury underneath. Brad went directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He told them everything, exposing the shell companies, the offshore funds, and Sloan Hartley's true identity as Susan Mitchell. He presented himself as a victim, a man deceived by a master criminal. The agents listened intently, took detailed notes, and then started making calls. 24 hours later, they showed up at Sloane's apartment with a warrant for her arrest. She was not there. They found her at Brad's company, trying to retrieve incriminating documents. They arrested her in the main lobby in front of everyone. The flash of cameras and the shouting of reporters created a media storm. Soon, images of the beautiful executive in handcuffs were everywhere. Elena watched the news from her apartment with Rachel by her side. For the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. It is over, isn't it? She asked. They arrested her. Brad confessed. The focus is on them now. Rachel nodded. It certainly seems that way. The authorities appear to believe you were just another one of their victims. The forensic analysis of the forged signatures and the timeline both support your innocence. So I am finally in the clear? You are in the clear. Elena let out a long, shuddering breath. The immense tension she had carried for months began to fade away. She looked at a photo of her son, Evan. I got them for you, baby, she whispered. 2 days later, her phone rang. Rachel's voice was tight with panic. The charges against Sloan were dropped. What? The evidence Brad gave them was corrupted. Every single file was wiped from the federal system. That is impossible. How could that happen? I have no idea, but Sloan is walking free. And Elena, that is not all. What else could there be? She knows we were behind it. She knows you are the reason Brad turned against her, and she is not going to let it go. Elena sank into a chair, the familiar feeling of dread returning. So she is coming after me? She is coming after all of us. Whoever she has helping her, she is going to use them to destroy us. The first attack came just hours later. Elena went to her father's house for a meeting and found paramedics rushing him into an ambulance. His face was pale, and he was clutching his chest, struggling to breathe. Dad, she cried, running to him. What happened? A heart attack, a paramedic told her. We have to go now. Are you his daughter? Yes, I am, his daughter. Elena climbed into the ambulance and held her father's cold hand. Dad, just stay with me. Marcus opened his eyes, his grip surprisingly strong. Do not stop, he rasped. No matter what happens, you finish this. Dad, promise me. I promise. His eyes closed again as the paramedics worked on him. Elena could only watch, feeling another piece of her world crumble away. Marcus survived the surgery, but he faced a long recovery in the hospital. He would not be able to help her anymore. Elena was on her own. Then her phone rang again. It was Rachel. Elena braced for more terrible news. "I have to withdraw from your case," Rachel said, her voice strained. "What? No, you cannot. You are my only lawyer." Then her lawyer called. "Sloan has something on me from my past," Rachel stammered, her voice thick with tears. "If I do not back away, she will destroy my career and my family. I am so sorry, Elena. I cannot risk it." "I understand," Elena lied, her own heart breaking. The line went dead. She sat in the hospital waiting room, a sterile, gray box. Her father was in recovery from an attack. Her best friend was gone. Her enemies were free and closing in. She had never felt so completely alone. Her father was stable, but everything else was a disaster. Sloan was free. Brad was cooperating with the authorities, painting himself as the victim. The evidence Elena and Rachel had gathered was now useless. Then the text messages from Sloan started. "Did you really think you could win?" one read. "Your father is weak. Your friends are gone. I am going to destroy everything you care about, and you are going to watch." Elena deleted each message without replying. She refused to give Sloan the satisfaction of a reaction. But in the quiet darkness of the waiting room, she felt her hope begin to fade. What was the point of all this fighting? Evan was still gone. Brad and Sloan were still winning. Every time she took a step forward, they pushed her 2 steps back. Maybe it was time to just give up. She pulled out her phone and looked at a photograph of Evan, his face bright with laughter. "I failed you," she whispered to the image. "I tried so hard, but I failed." A wave of grief crashed over her, and she doubled over, shaking with silent sobs. After a long moment, she felt a gentle touch. A nurse was standing over her. "Mrs. Crawford, your father is awake now. He is asking for you." Elena walked into his room. Her father, Marcus, looked smaller in the hospital bed, but when he looked at her, his eyes were sharp and full of fight. "You look awful," he said. Elena managed a small laugh. "Look who is talking." "True enough." He motioned to the chair. "Sit down. Tell me what happened." Elena explained it all. She told him about the charges, the threats from Sloan, and the feeling of complete defeat. Marcus listened patiently. When she was done, he asked, "So you are giving up?" "I do not see another way." "Yes, you do." He looked her right in the eye. "You are my daughter. You are not weak, and you will not let this woman win. But Dad, she ruined everything. She only ruined our first plan," he corrected her, shifting in his bed. "In my old job, we had a name for this. It is called getting burned. It means your cover is gone. Your resources are stripped away. It feels like the end of the world, right? No, this is just the beginning of a new plan. Our first attempt was careful and legal. It did not work. So we moved to Plan B. What is Plan B?" Marcus gave a cold smile, the one from his younger days. "Sloan has a history of hurting families. Find her other victims. A woman like her makes enemies, and those enemies remember everything. Find the lives she tore apart and the secrets she tried to bury." "But how? Where do I begin?" "You start with public records and old news stories. She has been at this a long time. There will be a trail. What if I find them? What happens then? Then you do the one thing she never saw coming. You give those people hope. You give them a chance for justice. You build an army." "An army?" Elena repeated, stunned. "Sloan attacks people who are alone and have nothing. She knows they're easy targets because they cannot defend themselves. But if they stand with you, together," Marcus said, "you can take her down." The idea was dangerous and full of risk. There were no guarantees, but for the first time in a while, Elena had a plan. "I will try," she whispered. "No," her father corrected her. You will succeed. You have to. For Evan. Elena slowly nodded. She kissed her father's forehead. Get some rest. I have work to do. For the next 3 days, Elena lived in a world of research. She dug through old court cases and news reports, looking for Sloan's pattern. She found a family in Cleveland from 2016. The wife was framed for theft and later took her own life. Then there was a couple in Atlanta from 2019. The husband vanished with their savings, and the wife was left with criminal charges. In Phoenix, in 2021, it was the same heartbreaking story. With every case, Elena saw the ghost of the same woman, always with a different name. It was always her work. Susan Mitchell, Sandra Martin, Sarah Monroe, Sloan Hartley, 4 identities, 4 destroyed families, 1 monster. Elena put all the evidence into a folder. She started making calls, but most leads went nowhere. Then one name surfaced again and again. Margaret Patterson. She was listed as a witness who had tried to help. Elena found her in a small town in Pennsylvania. It took 3 calls for Margaret to pick up. Who is this? Her voice was sharp with distrust. My name is Elena Crawford. I believe we know the same person, Sloan Hartley. You may have known her by another name. There was a long pause. Susan Mitchell. That was her name when she ruined my life. I know. Elena held the phone tighter. She is doing it to me right now. I need your help. After another pause, Margaret spoke. I saved everything, every single piece of paper. I always knew this day would come. I am on my way, Elena said. Just tell me where. Margaret's house was on a quiet street in a run-down town. The paint was chipping and the curtains were drawn tight. The woman who opened the door looked much older than her 52 years. Her eyes were tired, filled with old pain. You must be Elena, she stated. I am. Please, come in. The house was small and packed with belongings. The house was less of a home and more of an archive, buried under boxes and mountains of paper. Margaret led Elena into a small living room, saying, For years I have been waiting for someone like you, someone who could finally use what I have collected. What is it? Elena asked. Margaret gestured to the chaos around them. Everything. It is every email Susan ever sent, every document she ever signed. After she destroyed my family, I spent 3 years tracking her. I organized it all, preparing for this moment. Ready for what? For you, Margaret said, handing Elena a thick folder, for someone who could truly fight back. Inside, Elena saw proof of fraud that stretched across years and multiple states. Why not go to the police? I tried, Margaret said, with a bitter voice. They either did not believe me or they were paid not to. Susan has friends in very high places. Every time I got close, she made the evidence vanish. She made me look like I was crazy. So you just stopped? No, I survived, Margaret corrected her, her eyes locking with Elena's. There is a very big difference. I had nothing left to fight with, but I saved everything. I hoped one day a person with more strength and more resources would come along. Elena thought of her own father, of Rachel, and of Evan. I have a reason to fight, she said softly. Then take it all, Margaret insisted, pushing the files into her arms. Use every last piece and make that woman pay for what she did to all of us. Over the next 2 days, Elena immersed herself in Margaret's files. The true scale of Sloan's crimes was shocking. She had ruined at least 4 families that Elena could prove, and likely many more. She had stolen millions of dollars using different names, leaving behind a decade-long trail of broken lives. And she had always gotten away with it. But this time would be different. This time, Elena had a father with government contacts, a lawyer who knew how to win, and a whole network of victims just waiting for a chance at justice. Elena picked up the phone and called Rachel first. I know you said you had to step away, Elena started. I did. Rachel's voice was filled with exhaustion. Elena, you have no idea what Sloan has on me. Actually, I think I do, Elena replied calmly. I am not asking you to do anything illegal or to put your name on anything. I just need your help one more time, completely behind the scenes. What are you thinking? I plan to take Sloan Hartley down the exact same way she took down Margaret Patterson and everyone else, she said. I will expose the truth with a case so strong that no amount of money or corruption can make it go away. There was silence on the other end of the line. I found Margaret, Elena added. She has everything. Years of proof tying Sloan to fraud in 6 different states, with real names and real account numbers. How can you be sure that evidence is clean? Elena explained. Because none of it is digital. Margaret kept physical copies of everything, paper documents and photographs that cannot be wiped from a server. After another long pause, Rachel finally asked, "What do you need me to do?" "I need your help organizing this quietly. Tell me which evidence is the strongest and which courts would be most likely to prosecute." "Are you trying to build a federal case?" "I am building several of them." Elena's voice turned to steel. "Sloan made evidence disappear from the Federal Bureau of Investigation once. She cannot do that again if we file in multiple places at the exact same time." Rachel took a deep breath. "This is completely insane." "Is it really?" Rachel let out a reluctant laugh. "All right, send me what you have. I will take a look." "But Elena, you need to know. If this goes wrong, if Sloan finds out what we are doing before we are ready, it will be a catastrophe." "I know," Elena said with a grim smile. "That is why we are not going to let it fail." The next 2 weeks were an absolute whirlwind. Elena worked 18-hour days, sorting through evidence and calling contacts her father gave her. Marcus, who was recovering well, managed things from his hospital bed over secure phone lines. Rachel worked in the shadows, pinpointing the best cases for the most aggressive jurisdictions. She put Elena in touch with prosecutors in Ohio, Georgia, and Arizona who had been stuck on unsolved fraud cases for years. Margaret was their constant support, filling in missing details that only she would know, slowly but surely. The case against Sloan Hartley started taking shape. When everything was finally in place, Elena called a meeting in her small apartment. Her father, now out of the hospital, sat in the best chair, looking frail but determined. Rachel stood near the window, a mix of nervous and committed. Margaret had even traveled all the way from Pennsylvania to be there. 4 people against a whole empire of deceit, Elena thought. It would have to be enough. "We are ready," Elena announced. "Tomorrow morning, we file charges in 4 states at the same time: Ohio, Georgia, Arizona, and New York. Each case is separate and backed by physical proof. Sloan cannot make it all disappear." "What about Brad?" Rachel asked. "Brad is already working with the federal authorities," Elena replied. "He is testifying against Sloan to save his own skin. His story, combined with our proof, creates a trap she cannot escape." "And her government contacts?" Marcus offered a cold smile. "I made a few calls to some old friends. The people who helped her before are now under investigation themselves. By the time Sloan knows what is happening, her protection will be gone." Elena looked at her small team of allies. Just a year ago, she was a mother with a sick child and a failing marriage. 6 months ago, she lost everything she thought was important. But in its place, she found a strength she never knew she had. Tomorrow, we take everything from her, just like she took everything from us. "Are you ready?" Everyone in the room nodded. They were ready. Elena picked the restaurant with care. It was upscale and quiet, a place for conversations not meant to be overheard. Sloan arrived right on time, looking perfect as always. She radiated a powerful confidence as she slid into the booth. "I was surprised you called for a meeting," Sloan said with a thin smile. "I figured you would be busy planning a funeral." I hear your father's health is not so good. He is getting better, thank you, Elena said, ignoring the insult. A shame, Sloan said, barely looking up from the menu. So, you wanted to discuss terms. I take it that means you are finally ready to give up. Actually, Elena replied, I am here to give you a choice, Sloan laughed out loud. A choice? You have nothing. Your lawyer is gone, and you have no evidence. Your father is an old man living on borrowed time. What choice could you possibly offer me? Elena reached into her bag, pulled out a folder, and slid it across the table. Susan Mitchell, she said softly. Cleveland, 2016. The Patterson family. Sloane's confident smile flickered for a moment. Sandra Martin, Atlanta, 2019. The Williams family. The smile disappeared completely. Sarah Monroe, Phoenix, 2021. The Henderson family. Elena leaned in, her voice like ice. I have everything. Every name you used, every family you ruined, every bit of destruction you thought you had buried forever. Sloane's perfect composure finally cracked, and for the first time, Elena saw fear in her eyes. I found Margaret, Elena went on. Remember her? The woman you thought was too broken to ever fight back. Whatever she gave you is worthless, Sloan said, trying to recover. They are just old papers that will never hold up in court. You are wrong, Elena said with a smile. Margaret kept physical copies, paper, photos, bank records, things that cannot be deleted. And they all trace back to you through every fake name you have ever used. That does not prove anything. It proves everything. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has copies now. Not the agents on your payroll, but a different team that has been investigating you for months. Sloane's face turned white. You are bluffing. Am I? Elena held up her phone, showing Sloan a screen full of breaking news alerts. Imagine being betrayed so completely that your only option is to burn down the world of the person who wronged you. That was Elena's reality. She looked at Sloan and calmly laid out the facts. Charges were being filed against her in 4 different states. We are talking about fraud, identity theft, and money laundering. In a few hours, the Federal Bureau of Investigation would add their own charges. Elena leaned in, her voice low. Your contacts are gone. Your money is useless. And just so you know, Brad is already talking. He is in custody, trading every secret you have for a lighter sentence. He is saving himself. Sloane's confident mask crumbled. Her hands shook. You taught him that, did you not? Self-preservation above all else. Sloane's face twisted in fury. You think this is over? I have people who will crush you, she hissed. Elena simply stood and placed some money on the table for her coffee. You came after my family, she said, her voice perfectly steady. You helped my husband believe his affair was more important than our dying son. You ruined my life, she leaned close to Sloane's face. But you forgot something important about me. I was not always a housewife. Before that, I was a trial lawyer, and I have an excellent memory. Elena straightened up and grabbed her purse. You can either wait for the agents to arrive, or you can run. Either way, they will catch you. She then walked out without a second glance. Just 24 hours later, news channels showed Sloan Hartley being arrested at the airport, trying to flee the country. The once glamorous woman looked messy and terrified as she was led away in handcuffs. Elena watched the news report from her father's house, surrounded by her small circle of allies. Her father, Marcus, was finally recovering. Her friend Rachel no longer had to live in fear, and Margaret, whose life Sloan had also destroyed, cried tears of relief. Is it finally over? Margaret asked. Not quite, Marcus replied. We still have to deal with Brad. 2 weeks later, Brad Crawford faced his own judgment. The courtroom was full. Elena sat in the front row as the judge sentenced him to 15 years in prison. He was found guilty of financial crimes and, most importantly, child endangerment. As they led a broken Brad away in an orange jumpsuit, his days of fancy suits and arrogant smiles were clearly over. But just before he left the room, Elena made sure their eyes met. She did not need to smile or celebrate. She just held his gaze until he looked away in shame. For the next 15 years, he would have to live with the memory of his son dying while he was with his mistress. That was true justice. After the sentencing, Marcus began his own quiet campaign. He first visited Brad's mother, Diane. Her social life had already fallen apart after Elena's lawsuit became public. She had been kicked off every charity board and shunned by her friends. "I do not think we have anything to talk about," she said coldly. Marcus stepped inside anyway. "You knew about your son's affairs, and you covered for him," he stated. "A grandmother should protect her grandchild. You failed." He placed a folder on her table. "This is a press release that details how your family enabled a criminal. It is being sent to every major news outlet tomorrow. I also made a large donation to a prominent charity. In return, they are publishing a special feature on families who enable abuse. Your name is mentioned several times. You taught Brad that appearances are everything," Marcus said. "Now you will see what happens when the truth is revealed." He left her standing there, her face pale with shock. Within a month, Diane had sold her apartment and moved away, hoping to escape her tarnished name. Next, Marcus arranged to visit Brad in the detention center. He sat across from the man who had destroyed his daughter's life. "Do you know the last word your son said?" Marcus asked, his voice low. "It was Daddy. He called for you while he was struggling to breathe because you ignored his mother's calls. You silenced your phone so you would not be disturbed with your mistress." "I did not know he was so sick," Brad cried. "You did not care, and that is so much worse," Marcus corrected him. "Your career is over, your money is gone, your freedom is gone, but the real punishment is what you will carry forever, every night, for the rest of your life. You will see your son's face and hear him calling for you. You will remember that you could have saved him, but you chose not to." Marcus walked to the door as Brad's broken sobs filled the room. "Live with that," he said, and closed the door behind him. His final visit was to Sloan. She had been sentenced to 47 years with no chance of parole. She would die in prison. Even in her prison uniform, she tried to act tough. "You have nothing," she sneered. Marcus simply put another folder on the table. "Every powerful friend you thought you had has been given proof of your crimes. They have all abandoned you. There are no escape routes left. You thought my daughter was an easy target." He leaned in, his voice a whisper. "You miscalculated. I am a man who spent 30 years learning how to be patient. Enjoy your 47 years. I will make sure you are completely alone for every single one of them." He left her sitting there as the crushing reality of her future finally set in. 1 month later, Elena was at a doctor's appointment, listening to news that would change her life all over again. "Congratulations," the doctor said with a warm smile. "You are about 12 weeks pregnant." Elena's hand flew to her stomach, her mind racing. 12 weeks. That meant the baby was conceived before her world fell apart. It was before her son, Evan, had passed away. A new life had been growing inside her through all the pain and chaos. She quickly did the math. The timing lined up with the last time she had been with Brad, right before she discovered the full extent of his betrayal. This baby was Evan's little brother or sister. It was a connection to the son she had lost. "Are you okay?" the doctor asked gently. Elena laughed through a sudden rush of tears. "I am just a little overwhelmed. Given your situation, we can discuss all of your options." "No," Elena said, her voice firm with certainty. "I want this baby more than anything in the world." The doctor smiled kindly. "Then we will provide you with the very best care." Elena drove to her father's house, feeling like she was in a dream. Marcus was in the garden, looking stronger each day. He saw the expression on her face and immediately came over. "What is it?" he asked. When she told him the news, he was silent for a moment. Then a soft smile spread across his face, but "Another grandchild," he said quietly. He pulled her into a tight hug, just like he did when she was a child. "This is a gift, Elena," he whispered. "After all the loss and heartbreak, this is a beautiful gift." "I know," she said, burying her face in his shoulder, ready to embrace her new future. "I am going to name her Hope, because that is exactly what she is. She is the hope that Evan gave me, even when I thought there was nothing left." 3 months later, Elena stood in the Evan Crawford Memorial Garden, a beautiful park funded by the money recovered from Sloan and Brad. In the middle of it all was a stone with her son's name carved into it. Elena rested a hand on her growing stomach as she read the words, "Evan Marcus Crawford, beloved son, forever loved, the bravest boy I ever knew." Marcus stood beside her, leaning on a cane but looking strong. Rachel was there too, finally free from Sloane's control. Margaret had also come to see the beautiful garden that her years of quiet determination had helped create. The four of them were now bound together by both tragedy and victory. "You are going to have a little sister, Evan," Elena whispered to the memorial stone. "I am naming her Hope. That is what you gave back to me. Evan would be so proud of you," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "You kept going. I had to. I promised him." Rachel hugged her. "Now you have a fresh start." Elena nodded. "Yes, but this time is different." "How so?" "Before, I was always starting over for someone else. For my husband. For a life I thought I should want." She looked at her father and her friends. "This time, it is for me. And for both of my children. The one I miss every day, and the one on her way." Long after the ceremony ended, Elena stayed, watching the sunset over the pond. Her father and Rachel had gone home. As Margaret drove away, a weight seemed to lift with her. Elena was finally alone, and for the first time in months, her mind was quiet. She knew that time does not heal all wounds. Time only creates distance. Healing is a choice you have to make every day. She placed a hand on her belly, where hope was growing. She had lost her son, her marriage, and herself in a life that was never her own. But in the ashes of that life, she found the woman she was always supposed to be. "My father taught me that revenge is about balance," she thought. "It is about making sure the people who hurt you can never hurt anyone else." She touched the memorial stone. Brad would spend 15 years in prison remembering his choices. Sloan would spend her life paying for her crimes. And I can finally start over. She looked at the first stars in the sky. "This time, I am starting over for myself, for the son I lost, and for the daughter who is coming." She whispered one last time, "I love you, Evan." A butterfly landed on the stone, its wings catching the last bit of sunlight. It stayed for a moment, then flew toward the stars. Elena smiled, placed her hand on her belly, and walked into her new life. 4 months later, Hope Evan Crawford was born. She had her mother's eyes and her brother's smile. She was perfect. Holding her daughter in the hospital, Elena felt whole for the first time in years. Marcus and Rachel were there, sharing in her joy. "Welcome to the world, Hope," Elena whispered. "Your big brother is watching over you." 1 year later, Elena stood at the Evan Crawford Memorial Garden. It had become more than a memorial. It was a support center for families of children with heart conditions. 300 families had found help there in the past year. Something good had grown from something terrible. Elena carried Hope, pointing to the flowers and the pond. "See that stone?" Elena said. That is for your big brother. He was the bravest boy I ever knew. Hope reached for a butterfly, and Elena kissed her head. She thought of Brad and Sloan in their prison cells. She thought of her father, healthy and happy, spoiling his granddaughter. And she thought of Evan, his smile, and his little voice, asking if he would get better. You did get better, baby, she whispered to his memory, just in a different way. You are part of something that helps other families, now. A young mother approached Elena, looking as terrified as she once had. My son was just diagnosed, the woman said. I do not know what to do. Elena smiled kindly. Come inside, she said. Let me tell you a story about a brave little boy. He taught me that love is always stronger than loss. As she led the woman into the garden, Elena understood the truth. Grief does not end, it just transforms. Pain finds a new purpose. And true love never dies, it only changes shape. Remember this. The people who hurt you are counting on your silence. They expect you to crumble. But when you stand up, gather your evidence, and fight back with patience and intelligence, you become unstoppable. Never let anyone convince you that you deserve less than justice. If this story gave you strength, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story of survival and victory. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to bring you meaningful lessons and lasting value. Thank you for being part of this journey with us.